believers and believers, and Happy New Year. Welcome to Leaving Hillsong 2023. I am so excited that you have decided to spend time with us, more time talking about the court case. The court case. So, where to begin? Look, if you haven't listened to the other two parts of week one, I highly advise that you do that. Jake Elliot from the Framework account is with me, and we are just doing our best from our notes as we explain during the thing. So, it was like just taking notes, live action, Rambo style, really. So, thank you. I'll try and explain a few of the main characters just to kind of give you a quick refresher, just continuing with the Netflix theme. It's just like a, last season kind of thing. So, the series of events goes like this. Brett Sengstock disclosed child sexual assault by Frank Houston to his mother around the late 70s. 20 years later, she was at a church run by a pastor called Barbara Taylor, who had already testified. You could hear that in earlier episodes. And they were hosting an event by an evangelist called Kevin, quote, Mad Dog Mudford. Brett's mother attended that event, and she felt compelled to disclose Brett's disclosure to her years earlier to Barbara Taylor and Kevin Mudford. After a confrontation between Mudford and Taylor and Brett at Brett's house, Barbara Taylor began to write a series of letters to Frank Houston and Brian Houston trying to organise a meeting. And, there was so many things that came from that. Further to that, John McMartin was the state president of the National Executive of the Assemblies of God, which is the middle governance level, I just found out. So there's district, state, and national executive as governance bodies of the Assemblies of God. They are in charge, they're in charge of credentialing and taking credentials away, and I don't know what else, but disciplinary things apparently. And then there's George Agajanian, who we're told Kevin Mudford became so frustrated with not hearing back that he eventually called Hillsong and spoke to George Agajanian, the business manager of Hillsong at the time, or whatever it was called, who then, historically the story goes, relayed the information to Brian Houston for the first time. As Brian was shocked, that was the first time he'd heard it. So far, we've heard about ongoing attempts by Pastor Barbara Taylor to contact these men, and it took her months and months, and she told bits and pieces to John McMartin, and then he was called to testify right after George. But like I said, we're kind of, Prince Harrying it here. We're doing the very best with our notes and our memories and stuff, if you will. The other person involved here that we talk about, Bolton, is Philip Bolton, the defence barrister for the accused. So here we are with part 3 of week 1 of the court case. Enjoy. Are we ready for Johnny Mac?
I think so.
So on the 8th of December, John McMartin, the 30-year veteran of the AOG, Pastor Johnny Mac, took the oath. And he also took the option of a Section 128, where his evidence will not incriminate him, he will get immunity, or if it does incriminate him, he will get immunity
unless the information that they give under this act is false. So if they perjure themselves, they're still up for perjury. But apart from that, apparently they get immunity because that's how important the evidence is. So he said to him, what was your role? He said he was the senior pastor of Inspire Church. He left 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still a pastor now? The prosecution asked him. He said, no. You were the ACC be the ACC state president. So John McMartin, you were the ACC president from 2008 to 2018, because Brian stepped aside from being the president. Yeah, I think he was the state. Yeah, he was the state president because that's the whole problem is he passes it on to Brian, who's national. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. So John McMartin was asked. So John McMartin, you were the ACC national president from 2008 to 2018. When did you get information about Frank Houston's assault against a boy? When they asked John McMartin, when did you first get information that Frank Houston was alleged to be a pedophile? John McMartin said,
I'm pretty sure John McMartin said it was September.
He said, I've got it in my, we were so shocked. We were so like, what?
September 99. It's because he got allegations from Barbara Taylor, but he never got a name of the perpetrator, and he never got the name of the victim. And apparently he was asking her again and again, I need this information and then you need to also provide a statement. And Barbara Taylor wouldn't do that until September of 1999. And when he found out it was Frank Houston, he said that the pressure was now suddenly on him.
That is John McMartin's testimony. He said he first heard the allegations in November 1998. There was a huge debate regarding his memory of, who spoke to him, Mudford or Taylor first.
What was interesting with Bolton taking on McMartin was Bolton was going, so you really don't really have any recollection at all until you were looking at some of the papers from the Royal Commission. And he was like, yes. So there was a huge discussion around what you actually knew at that time, that's genuine, versus you looking at a piece of paper and getting a bit of a flashback almost to events. But what was interesting was the fact that in around about September and November, his memory was quite good without those pieces of paper, from what I understood. From my takeaway from what he said on the stand, he was speaking quite genuinely about what he knew without paper in September of 1999 and November 99 with that phone conversation. It was interesting that he was happy to talk more openly about what he remembered in September of 1999 and November 1999 without any paper prompting him. He seemed to be quite knowledgeable about those areas, but he did seem to confuse dates occasionally.
Okay, and then Bolton did his thing again, didn't he?
I'll just talk to this for a bit of a timeline. So Mad Dog Mumford and Barbara Taylor apparently approached John McMartin towards the end of the late 1998, and he said he had a vague memory of being approached by Mad Dog and Taylor. And when asked what did they tell you, he said they told me there was an accusation against a senior minister.
Yeah, he said he was miffed when he found out that it was Frank 10 months later. He said he could have done something about it. And that's when he says Barbara Taylor had testified that she had written a letter to John McMartin.
In May, yes.
McMartin denies receiving this letter. Barbara Taylor refused to tell him she had testified as well. She had held Frank, everyone had held Frank in such high esteem. It was, really hadn't wanted to name a name in case it wasn't true, or she was just small. And John McMartin testifies that he said, go tell Brian if you can't tell me. That's, maybe that's why she wrote letters. Who knows who actually said what when? He says that
with Mad Dog in that meeting, it was a face-to-face meeting. McMartin confirmed that And do you know where that took place? No. But later on, I think you said that it actually happened at his church.
Yes.
And
It
he
is
made the comment that Mumford was actually a church attendee as well.
right. And Mudford
And-
had been living in a spare house that the church owned or something while he was itinerant and evangelizing around the place. And John McMartin was asked if he could, say that he was on pretty good terms with a mad dog. And he said, no, not really, because it all does become very interesting. Who knew what went how? And then John McMartin says that when he found out, how long before he then calls Brian?
Oof. This sort of got weird because he did say September, early October. He was talking to Wayne Alcorn, and he made it sound that he contacted Brian not long after that in September. And he did say September, but then he kind of kept saying November as well, to the point that it was the prosecution that said, we are talking about November, right? And he didn't even answer that question. And everything was framed between 1998, November, to September 1999. And here he is talking about a conversation he's having with Brian Houston in that September time period.
Yeah.
So that it confused me, but that conversation happened in November at some point.
So John McMartin insists that at some point he called Brian on the phone and said, there are allegations against your father. Brian was shocked. He said, is this true? And McMartin responded, his evidence was that he said, I don't know, but it needs to be investigated.
Yeah.
I think, was that the conclusion of day 4?
Yeah. Nearly there. So McMartin was in the afternoon, later afternoon, and George Arcadiani did say some really startling things.
Okay, so I think I've jumped ahead a little bit too far, and I just didn't give you the chance to talk about that, because it's like being in, it's like watching a Netflix show and there were like 5 episodes, but like you press pause at different points and it's a bit of a blur, all right? You try and take notes at a Netflix thing that I don't even, the media have an audio visual link. They are able to stream it. They are not able to record it. It's illegal for them to record it. So there's, we've got limited access to what took place as, in terms of records at this stage. So we're just doing our best. And I'm sorry, Jake, you had more stuff on George. So John McMartin actually was the afternoon of day 4, the Thursday, and then he followed on into Friday, the 9th. So I've missed a chunk of George in the morning of day 4. I'm sorry, my friend, please jump in.
Okay, so one startling revelation that he gave to us was that Hazel Houston was a pastor. Was she actually a pastor? Quote, yes, she was a pastor by CLC. Close quote. There was a bit of a pause, and then he said, I found out overnight. So he just obviously left the court the previous day and asked around, and everyone was like, oh yeah, Hazel was a pastor of CLC. So this is important because they were discussing Hazel and Frank's retirement package, the Ben Senstock allegation and the AAG executive meeting in December of 1999. There was a period of 9 months where they were just still trying to manage Brett Senstock until another victim came forward from New Zealand that Brian Houston met with, the psychologist victim. Remember that? This victim requested 3 things, and Brian Houston in the year 2000 brought this attention to the board as well, the Hillsong board in November 2000. My dates are all over the place, so forgive me.
Is this George's testimony?
It's about to come up. He was part of the Hillsong executive meeting in Hillsong board meeting in 2000 to deal with, I actually thought this New Zealand complaint. But what I found out was said that they were there in that executive board meeting, at the Hillsong board meeting, that's the document, to discuss not just Brett Senstock, but also to discuss this New Zealand victim as well.
Okay, so when did this meet? This is George's testimony.
Yeah.
And when was that meeting held?
It was in November 2000. I didn't write the day down exactly, but on my Instagram. You can see that letter. But there was a section on it that said retirement letter. Frank's resignation letter was tabled. It was agreed that John Mays should respond on behalf of the elders, thanking Frank for his immeasurable contribution to the church. They asked the question to George Agajanian, when did Frank Houston cease to be an employee of the church? And he said, I believe in the late 2000s. Quote, his decision was to cut him from the payroll. Agajanian's response was, quote, he was still working for the Sydney CLC. He was still on the payroll until the end of 2000. So I found that fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Okay, so his credentials were stripped.
Yeah.
And yet he was, as such, on the payroll. I mean, we know that Frank and Hazel Houston were supported financially by Hillsong or whoever they were named at the time until their deaths, and their rent was paid and stuff. So,
so this is important because Nabi and George, which I found out in this week, were the ones responsible for the merging of these two churches. So the question was asked to George.
What happened there?
So the question was asked to George, was Brian on the board of the Sydney CLC at the time? And he said he wasn't sure, but he was senior pastor. So it looked like there was just a lot of leadership overlap, and no one knew who was responsible for what in the middle of the merge between Sydney CLC and Hill CLC. So they were trying to extract information like who was responsible, who was with what leader was responsible for what, was John Mays reporting to this person or that person. So it was a very confusing time when everything was being merged. This is a big one. It was the question was asked to George Agajanian, quote, I understood that Frank Houston committed a crime, close quote. And his response, by the year 2000, yes. So I found that interesting. I don't know why he said that.
And for those who, are real players along at home, there was a doctor on the board of directors or elders.
Yeah.
For such a long time, Dr. Gordon Lee, who only resigned from his duties, 6-8 months ago. He was Frank's physician, and
it was common knowledge that Gordon Lee was Frank Houston's personal doctor.
Well, what was revealed as well this week is something that people had wondered as to who had diagnosed Frank with Alzheimer's, dementia, because much of the reasons given for particular decisions made regarding the church or regarding Frank's position or various leaders' positions was due to his failing health. As the defence had mentioned in opening statements, their claim is that Frank Houston was old for his age. It was likely he was suffering with dementia, and that he would have been diagnosed around 1999. And it's just been another interesting details that it was an elder of the church who, someone close to his personal physician, that made that diagnosis. And nobody else independent. It became interesting in the future. It became relevant.
So I've got here that they actually said the date of that diagnosis was March 2003. It said they were trying to, it was like observing his decline back in 3 or 4 years ago. Obviously, he might have said something, maybe in 1999, and then March 2003, he was diagnosed. He observed these tendencies 3 to 4 years earlier. It was all conversation. We couldn't see the document, but they were talking about the nature of the diagnosis and reading bits of it out or summarizing it. So what was interesting as well is some audio and footage of Hillsong conference were being played of Brian Houston recalling his handling of his father when George came to talk to him about, I've got terrible news about your father. I just found it interesting to see George's reaction from the stand while that video and audio was being played. And they were kind of just grilling him on that information. So the audio at that stage, Agajanian was hearing was, quote, a couple of years ago, I received the worst news of my life. My father, who was my hero, was accused of sexual abuse. I had to confront my father, who I loved and still loved. That was the video from 2002, July 12th. So they had the entire conference, obviously, on a USB stick. They went for about 2 hours. We just watched the end of it, 1 hour and 55 minutes in. And they just grilled him about these audio bits. I didn't really know why particularly, but they did.
That's been the unexpectedly exciting part of this case, and why I think it's so important to talk about it because, you know, if these boys had their way, people would continue to think that it's just a crime that's alleged from a long time ago, and who knows why they're bringing it all up. But it is very clear that the prosecution has a whole kind of, a case to make, a plot to outline that they would propose. And it's not evident when you watch it why things are happening, hey?
But what was interesting with Brian recalling it is that he said, quote, the reason why I'm still here is because, thank God, I have a relationship with God. Transforms lives. That was from the video.
Was that in evidence this week, yeah?
Yeah, that's what Brian said in that video. And there was talk about, like, did you tell Brian, like, if you did talk about his father, what words to say? So there was just conversation around that with George Agajanian. Were they broadcast? Channel 10 every morning. Was that marketed? I assume so, meaning like being sold outside. These entire like segments of the Hillsong conference in 2002. Was that video televised? I assume so. And they were talking about it being viewed on Channel 10 in the morning. So Brian Houston was openly talking about his father committing sexual abuse. But for some reason, this fell into George's lap to talk about this and explain this. So I found that interesting.
They've had the DPP has had around 2 years, I think, to prepare for this, or 3? When did the investigation begin? 2019, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So the DPP's had since I think the investigation started in 2019, and they've had a lot of time to prepare, and it's turning out to be quite a twister and a turner, which brings us into day 5 again.
Yep.
Because, come on, raise your voice, tell me a story. What happened? Because you were saying John McMartin seemed to be able to recall a whole series of events without referring to any notes when he was questioned initially. And then the defense asked him, and he started going this kind of really deep crimson color. So he's a tanned man, but he's going this kind of, it was kind of like a, I don't know, like a lovely wine, like a lovely red wine color all over his face as he was sort of trying to remember stuff.
Yeah, so what was interesting about his ways he was trying to remember information was because he usually had pieces of paper to help prompt him. Okay, so at some point in engaging with Mrs. Bolton, he was asking like there was conversation about the letter that he never got from Barbara Taylor, the May letter, where she actually disclosed more information about Frank Houston.
Okay.
That letter that he never got in 1999. May 1999.
That he never received. That's right.
So yeah, in May 1999, Barbara Taylor did try to get John McMartin a letter getting more details about Frank Houston and Betsy Senstock, and Bolton was going a bit more severe towards John McMartin, saying things like, if you were looking at those details in that letter, you would know that she is talking about Frank Houston. So why didn't you do anything? And he's still going, I didn't get that letter. I haven't seen that letter. This started going down an interesting turn. Quote, did you keep all your correspondence in your church? Close quote. Unless it was a Christmas card, everything was thrown in storage for 7 years. And
that's right.
So up to 7 years, things were disposable, but we would keep the important information. And so down this avenue of conversation, to speed this up, he made a comment that he did have pieces of paper in a Frank Houston file. And that were his words, a Frank Houston file. And everyone was kind of going, wait, what? You had a Frank Houston file and suddenly that just disappeared? Like, I was thinking that, going, what's going on here?
It was a moment. Again, if it was a movie, like we were all, us, like 4 groupies on the side, like.
So from talking quickly about this letter to saying that he kept stuff in his church, but then having pieces of paper in a Frank Houston file, you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was like, did we just hear that? Bolton
was September 99. I mean, if you're a real, like, tragic, like, wow. If you're a close follower, it's like, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope there's no ad break soon. Next.
Yeah. Yeah, so he was talking about the pieces of paper in his Frank Houston's file, and, quote, he tossed them in the bin at some point. And everyone was like, wait, you tossed what out? And very quickly it was asked, please provide the context. When did you have this and when did you toss it into the bin? And he disclosed the fact that at the Royal Commission, just before the Royal Commission, when he was preparing his statement, he had those pieces of paper, and he was using those pieces of paper to help him write his statement. And he made it very clear that after he had wrote that statement, he took those pieces of paper and, quote, tossed them in the bin, close quote.
Like, literally, and threw them away, which very quickly after that, a subpoena was ordered for precisely what? Documents from Inspire Church that John had left.
As soon as he said that, both sides were kind of like standing up and talking to the magistrate, talking about subpoena. And it was hard to understand what they were talking about so quickly, but it seemed urgent. And they were looking at subpoenaing, they subpoenaed Inspire Church to get the documents from there straight away.
Well, the request was made, I believe, by the defence for the documents to be subpoenaed. And that they be returned by the end of the court day. And I've been wondering if there was some kind of like raid by the police and filing cabinets getting flung around the place, but they were returned by the end of the court day. The defence held up a yellow envelope, like a business envelope, and said, there's two sets of documents in here. One of them is privileged information. Mr. McMartin has a solicitor present in court. The solicitor then identified himself. He's got a lot of reading to do this weekend. There's going to be decisions made about which of those documents are admissible or not. That's the cliffhanger, I think, isn't it?
It was. The ironic thing is that Keith Ames was summoned to the stand. He only had a few minutes, and all the documents came in, and that was it. we came back from lunch to listen to Keith Ames, and it didn't go for too long at all. So the documents came into the room. He was like the admin, wasn't he? Wasn't he the admin of the executive?
The secretary?
So he was the one that was responsible for the minutes in the December 22nd, 99 executive meeting discussing Frank and the victim. Yeah. So McMartin left in the first recess, and coming back, we had Keith Ames take the stand. And that meeting was really important because that was when Brian Houston told everyone there about Frank and this victim, and it was up to them now to deal with this situation. He was there to talk about what happened in that meeting. And so they asked what's he currently doing, and he said that he's currently working for Hillsong Church in relation to credentials. So I found that interesting. He's still working for Hillsong. But back in 1999, he was a full-time secretary based in Melbourne, and one of his functions of that role was to take minutes of meetings, and he was aware of Frank Houston's allegations, apparently. So what I found really important about that meeting from his testimony was, quote, everyone arrived not knowing what that meeting was about. So when Brian told everyone to meet at that December 20 executive meeting in 1999, he made it very clear that no one knew about Frank at that point. They all rocked up.
Okay.
And this meeting happened at the Qantas Club at Sydney Airport. The question asked to Keith Ames, quote, did you contact all the other people to attend? His response, my office did. When I came into that meeting, I knew nothing. I don't know what details he'd been given. Wayne Alcorn, another person who was there. Brian Houston apparently just said something at the very beginning of that meeting and then handed it over to, from Keith Ames' understanding, John Lewis. So it's interesting. Brian Houston didn't leave the room. Keith Ames said that he was in the room watching the meeting.
Hang on.
Okay.
Okay.
So I just want to read out one really important quote from that minutes meeting, which anyone can access from the Royal Commission. It said, it was noted that an allegation has been made against Reverend Frank Houston of a single act of sexual abuse more than 30 years ago. The complainant does not wish to be identified and does not wish to make a formal complaint, but Frank Houston has confessed to the act, close quote. So they talked about him regarding the nature of what Brian Houston said in that meeting and what he observed people in that meeting were saying regarding this revelation.
Okay.
And what I found interesting, Keith Ames said because no one knew the nature of the meeting, there was no manual in that meeting. So everyone came in completely shocked and disarmed. That was a real bombshell revelation.
What a
The
merry
audio team-
that must have been. Thank you, Brian. Go home to your families with that one, boys. Little morsels this trial provides. I tell you what,
Oof.
the morsel.
So
Yeah.
I've got something that looks like a quote here in my notes. I didn't have the manual. We didn't have the manual in this meeting because we didn't know what the meeting was about. They did proceed to deal with the matter, quote, on the basis that they did receive a confession, close quote. Quote, there was no formal complaint, close quote, information provided by Brian Houston. So it looks as though they were very limited on information that they received from Brian Houston, and they did their best to follow through.
What else did Mr. Ainge say?
After lunch, he took the stand, and wow, in comes all the documents, the subpoenaed documents. Big yellow A4 package full to the brim of documents from Inspired Church. And that was it for him.
Yeah, and that's where, the solicitors started nodding and chatting and calling each other my friend, as what is the standard term that lawyers use here. So there was a lot of my friend, and like we said, Mr. McMartin, fairly young solicitor's got a lot of paperwork to get through fairly soon. What else happened after that, Jakey?
Sat around getting up. We saw people walk in and out. We saw the prosecution and then the defense walking in and out. Brian Houston was called out at some point.
That's right. He had to sit outside for a while things were being discussed.
Yeah, everything was very active in the last 45 minutes of the day. And Bolton came in and was talking about how he handled the documents and how the prosecution handled the documents. It was like a legal thing that they had to do so that no one saw anything specifically. One
of the outcomes is that the accused is excused from court on Monday morning. So Brian will get to have a bit of sleep in or while they assess this information.
Quite a surreal experience, just sitting there thinking, okay, it might come in. But how quick it happened, that was impressive.
Yeah,
that was really impressive.
What happened on the other side? I guess the idea is in any trial where they're going to subpoena contentious documents or something, the people on the other side might freak out or something. And so I guess that's why they have to act really quickly, and they acted really quickly.
But it was already categorized as well. Wow.
Well, I mean, we don't have precise estimates, but these are some of the finest legal assistance money can buy. And that's where, this is where you kind of run into Brian in the hallway, because you're someone like me and you're like, I'll just take a quick bathroom break while those boys are talking about this and that, the pieces of paper. And you kind of run into Brian who's waiting outside while the matter's being discussed in that narrow hallway I was telling you about earlier. It's been such a...
Just week one.
It's like being on the Hillsong Pentecostal AOG movie set.
Oh, yeah.
And doing these like unwanted cameos because, we're not exactly, you know what I mean? We're not exactly highly welcomed. Everyone's keeping a respectful distance, which is fantastic. And I will see you in court Monday, Jake.
And Tanya, guess what? The best is yet to come out.
Well, the best is yet to come out, Jake. You're right. Yes. It's or possibly the worst is yet to come out. But, we're going to turn it into some good. So we're going to see some good things happening. I truly believe that as awful and as excruciating as some of this is, I really think it's going to open some doors and drag some stuff into the sun. So what else can we do? As for predictions of an outcome, I wouldn't even take it upon myself. This is a highly skilled legal team. There's a barrister that we
Oh,
refer
yeah.
to, this Bolton, and then he's got
It's impressive. Mm.
3 solicitors with him instructing him. So, you know, there's folders and folders and folders of you know, their paperwork and stuff. So it's on. But yeah, I wouldn't take it upon myself to predict an outcome because we just don't
No
know.
way.
This is just a twisting plot. What's coming
Mhm.
next?
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being on, and
You're awesome.
so everyone listening, yeah, the best is yet to come out, or the worst is yet to come out. I know a lot of people have been hurt by these Pentecostal churches and other churches around Australia or around the world, and I think we can all look at this case and go, what can we learn from this down the track? Only good stuff can come out if you think about it, because we can learn from this. I don't know what your thoughts are, everyone. I'd like to see what you can bring to the table in the next few weeks, is talking about how, as the church, we can actually do better. How can we do good after this is all done and dusted?
I would echo that in terms of our community. It's not just up to the churches. The Royal Commission was into institutional responses into child sexual abuse, not church responses, not religious responses. It's how we as a community prioritise safeguarding kids, and, you know, also, you know, so many other things, dealing with the uncomfortable and addressing power and documentation. Got to tell you, write it down, people, write it down, put a date next to it.
Absolutely.
Thank
So
you,
thank
Jack.
you, Tanya. It's been a
See ya.
blessing. See you, bye.
See you outside the cafe.
Bye.
Well, thank you so much. If you've made it this far, I hope it's been illuminating for you. If you've got any questions, of course, send them along. Please don't add speculation on social media. I'll have to, you know, remove those comments because we're still under sub judice until the verdict has been delivered. We still need not to speculate, not to talk about guilt or innocence or what we think should happen to anybody, that kind of thing. And the reason that there has been a delay until June, if it hasn't been clear, is pretty much just the backlog of New South Wales courts where we live, still due to COVID. So there are closing arguments to be made, and that's been set down as 2 days, one for each side, and there just wasn't 2 days available. The judge said that's the best I could do to get everybody kind of their diaries aligned. So there's nothing sinister except for bureaucracy this time. Thank you again for your support, your messages. It's been fantastic. It has been, you know, it was grueling. It was fascinating and very grueling. So Jake and I are doing our best to bring you the rest of the court case. We've tried, and, you know, between our notes and our memories, we want to be as accurate as possible. So our last attempt didn't work, and we'll be bringing you the rest of this really interesting trial because there's some incredible moments to talk about in week 2 and in week 3. Stay tuned. Please keep looking after yourselves. Please keep sending messages and likes and shares and follows and all that kind of thing. Please be kind to yourselves, and be kind to other people. It's a smart move, and we'll talk more about that soon. Oh yeah, one more thing. So we didn't actually cover opening arguments, but I've got endless notes on it. So I'm just going to check with legals that I've got it right, and I will bring that to you because this is what the case and the defence are all based on, and it's quite interesting. So keep living Hillsong, and we'll talk soon. Bye.